So we are here to talk about September. Honestly, I can't believe it's been almost a year since we started these chats.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm learning a lot, and it's been really exciting to break down these topics. Before the pandemic, you periodically would run these series where we would work through the light bodies as like a workshop. And we haven't really been able to do that. And so this is kind of interesting that we're sort of, intellectually unpacking these concepts for people. I think it'll be a great reference point when you start teaching those workshops again as well, because we're really breaking down um, how all this stuff works.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be interesting. Um, yeah, because like you said, we tend to get stuck in what's happening now, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's what's attracting our conscious attention. But um, this is kind of like video journaling. You journal, what am I thinking now, and how am I looking at life, and how will it seem a year from now or 5 years from now? It'll be interesting. Um, but September it presents an interesting wrinkle in investigating um, sensitivity and projection. In that it works, you have the nine that works with subtlety, and so we have an invitation at this point to just refine sensitivity, and a lot of times we'll reject sensitivity because the more we become sensitive, the more stuff filters through, and um, and some of that stuff is pleasant, some of it's scary, some of it is has been
Painful.
hollering for attention for a while, and
Yeah.
it's a healing process. And that's what, I don't know if we talked about it or if I talked about it somewhere else, the difference between pain and suffering. But pain is part of the healing process, to realize what's happened, where the disparity lies, and what the effects of it are. And suffering is just continuing that process by not paying attention to it and not resolving it.
Mm.
So as we become sensitive and we stay with it, that the charge is becomes a unified field. It becomes less charged until it can balance at zero. When it balances at zero, you can let it go. We've been doing this past week. We've been doing this self hypnosis to dissolve frustration, but it's self hypnosis to dissolve anything. And it's just a matter of gathering breath. And in part one, part two is going deep into Shuniya and applying Shuniya to whatever is on top, whatever is happening, and then projecting something that you actually want
Mm.
for healing. And so the idea is, if something presents itself, you just get to sit with it. And if you sit with it in the usual mind, if you're not patient and you're not allowing your sensitivity to be and recognize so that you can zero it out, uh, then it turns into suffering, because it's not going to go away until we go through the healing process. So essentially, we're healing into infinity, healing into equilibrium.
Mm.
and and the good news, bad news is that that process doesn't stop. Bad news is you have to deal with this shit, but the good news is that eventually, if you just pay attention, it won't seem so bad, and actually it will equalize and disappear.
Mm.
So the subtle body, in charge of subtlety, sensitivity, and eventually realizing that we have mastery over everything,
Mm.
if we can sit with it,
Hmm.
if we can engage in that neutralizing process, uh, we'll be good. And to me, that's like the Garden of Shuniya, the Garden of Eden.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Samadhi is just traveling toward that space where the divine universal life is everything. There's no part that's doesn't deserve or need to be here,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We've made our laws and we've made our cultures and we've decided what's acceptable and not acceptable, but the divine concept of acceptable is much wider than our band of acceptability.
Yeah. And gosh, there's so much. There's so one thing that comes up for me when I'm starting to process these things is a feeling of like almost betrayal and like lack of trust because there's a childish projection of the divine or God as the ultimate protector. And there's a part of the psyche that's like, well, if God is the ultimate protector, then why would God allow suffering? Why would God allow oppression? Why would God allow these things to exist? And um, I think you're right. Like it is painful. It's very painful to start to encounter those pieces of that. Why you have to find a way to integrate that if you choose to move forward in that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay if you choose not to as well. Like no one is going to force you. No one's going to hold your nose to the grindstone. No. But there's deeper pain, right? There's more suffering available if you resist. And I think that's an important aspect of the work that you're doing and we're doing is to sort of offer that up on the plate of, hey, you don't necessarily have to resist. And I also, the other thing that came up, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about it, is the difference between escapism and recognition. Because, like, I think when we're in the process of recognition, we're moving towards that Garden of Shuniya, Garden of Paradise. We're leaning into the reality that is all encompassing, but that's the painful path, because you have to walk the narrow, what do they say? The path is narrow and the way is difficult, or, it's not the easy road. The easy road is to escape, and escapism provides us with the sensations of achieving the garden, but it's only temporary because you're just zooming forward and trying to skip past the pain and the suffering piece of it instead of going through the valley, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that because I see that as a big problem in our culture that's been building, and now I'm starting to see it more and more in the spiritual community as well, where people are using these sort of lofty concepts and spiritualism as an additional layer of escapism.
Yeah. Yeah. It, yeah, I think that's elastic as well. Um, but the I think the key is what persists, what lasts. It's like if we all have this longing to belong, which it seems we do, because we're always wanting things, we're always attracting things, we're always needing things that we have to work to get. Um, how long does that feeling when we attain it? How long does that last? And we know it's just a matter of time, depending on the size of the thing. If it's as small as a scoop of ice cream, that's going to last 5 minutes, if that, right? Uh, and if it's something like a relationship, a house, a car, that may last a little longer, but eventually, it'll fade. And and so there are all these stories of yogis going through this process of, okay, uh, I'm going to sit here and I'm not going to talk. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here and just seeing what happens without me having to do anything. And eventually they come into this place where people are attracted to them because of the aura of what they've discovered, and stop and halting that outer grabbing of happiness,
Mm,
but also that the process that you're talking about of working through the the things that prevent that lasting happiness, that connection uh, with life. Um, that's, we all have our ways of dealing with things, and the guy that's sitting under the tree is still dealing with that stuff, but he's dealing with it in a different way. We're dealing with it, interacting with one another, and noticing the reflection of all the collection of our experiences in the circumstances that come to us, whether it's people or incidents. And so just figure out, what are you called to do? What can you do? I mean, I guess it's possible for um, to do that these days. I don't You couldn't do it in the city, because they take you to the homeless uh, establishment that's in the process of being established. But yeah, doing the work. Eventually you have to do the work. You have to uh, recognize what's behind the magnetic charge of our experiences that make them either really unpleasant or really pleasant.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, when you were talking about our idea of the divine as parent, and what came to me is we all have different roles of what a parent does, and it's interesting to note that there's this trend in our culture um, now to protect children from everything. Don't be talking about critical race theory. Don't be talking about gay people. Don't be talking about anything that I think is wrong or that doesn't serve my my mental projection or my emotional well-being. And so these parents are protecting children from everything they're eventually going to be experiencing once they leave the house. And once they leave the house, their reactions are going to um, attract more consequence than they would if they got to experience it within the home,
mm,
and with some kind of mitigating guidance, from the parents is saying, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, there are gay people.
mhm,
There, there are, there is racism, and it's fully engaged now, even though it looks like it's not. It's
mm,
there. All of this stuff exists. There are murderers out there. You may run into one. If you do, what would you do? You're not going to say that to a 5-year-old, but you get into the teens, you go, okay, what are you going to do when this happens? When somebody wants to start a family, when you're whatever, what kind of choices do you make? Who are you? Who is getting into this relationship?
mm,
So, um,
mm,
so when we transfer the our anthropomorphize our concept of parent onto the divine's going to let that happen. Life lets it happen. Okay, what do you think about that? And you live with it until you go, maybe that wasn't quite so right on. Right? Maybe there's a broader brush that's creating the painting of life. So it's like the Christ presented that concept of mother and father,
Hmm.
in the teachings.
Hmm.
And doesn't mean, just a parent that's letting a child experience something, running and tripping, and then figuring out, oh, not so bad. It's not that they don't care; they're just giving the child the latitude to experience. And life is the same way. What's the worst could happen? Oh, I could I could transform out of this life into another life. It'll have consequences, and for some people it won't be pleasant. Maybe for the individual experiencing it, it won't be quite so pleasant. But no, that's the beauty of translating the energy of form. Never go away.
Mm.
You just find yourself somewhere else.
Yeah, in our culture, and I love what you said, and I think about these concepts a lot because I do a lot of work, and I do work with, the Kali and Shiva and these concepts, these big broad concepts. And when you start recognizing and associating the primal reality of mother, father, and really processing how that extends in that triangle out to the divine, because it's like one time I had this dream, I guess you would call it, or a meditation vision. And it was like you were sitting in front of me, and Yogi Ji was behind you, and Guru Ram Dass was behind him, and every layer behind was like a bigger, larger than life version. So it was like Russian nesting dolls, like each one was a little bit grander. And then behind um, Guru Ram Dass was Shiva, and behind him was the black sun, nothing, and I'm like looking at this like, okay, like a little hamster in my cage. um, and I think both are necessary. I think we, in many religions, having a very personal relationship with divinity is more normalized. And I think in Western culture, there's this big gap between, oh, God is like over there, and then you need this middle manager person here who's the clergy or the organization or whatever, and then like we'll tell you what God said. And it's like, no, like God is, my mother, my father, my me, it's the earth, it's, I don't know what it is. I really don't know what it is. And it
Mhm.
changes from day to day because I change from day to day. And so my need of what that relationship is also morphing. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. And I think, um, we as individuals recognizing how much growth we need to do and how much we are still like children. We're like children raising children, in many ways. Um, and my mom did this for me, and I think a lot of people miss this in part of their upbringing. I was very fortunate to have a parent who knew at some level that I was not her possession, but that I was a totally independent incarnation of consciousness, that she was the custodian and the curator of. And so she had a more, I mean, I got a lot of lessons and I got a lot of love and all those things, but there was a certain element of, I don't know, like figure it out for yourself. Like it's a journey of discovery. Go discover. Like let me know what you find out.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
we don't we and that's part of the like dependency that we have in the culture is like, we're always still, we're at some level broken and like looking for that perfect mom, perfect dad. And so we're looking for someone to tell us the right thing to do. And there's infinite number of, people at various stages of healing who are happy to tell you what to do. If you know,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not
You know,
usually
and
it's not usually the people who are most healed who are looking for that position.
right, right. You know, and so uh, Shiva and Kali end up being like the ultimate parent in that as you open to them, they'll say, okay, I we will allow these circumstances where uh, you think the parent doesn't exist, or you know, all these things that keep you from um, really appreciating life will become known to you, and you'll get to discover the um, whether they work or not. I was going to say whether they were true or false, but it's just like, hey, does that work for you to appreciate the divine? For some person, it's like a giant step. For another person, it's a step backward,
Yeah.
right? So we're getting the lessons we need, and yeah, like I've mentioned before, you know, it's like my resistance to invoking either of those parents has been like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready to lose that yet. I don't know if I'm ready to be destroyed. And what's saying I'm not ready to be destroyed is the egocentric patterns and that parallel psyche of illusion, not
Hmm.
ready to be um, uh, seen through and neutralized quite yet. So yeah, it's
I'm not recommending anyone do that work.
no, you can't. You don't want to open that door for someone else. You come on it on your own, you know, because it's
Terrifying.
to the egocentric mind. Yes, it is. And nothing wrong with the egocentric mind because it records everything and it helps you a lot of ways, but it also is uh, mesmerizing and or enchanting in other ways and prevent. Or no, it just expands your journey. It just expands
It
the journey.
well,
That's all.
it provides this coalescence that's very consistent and familiar and feels very safe. And I think it's interesting, like when we're talking about the subtle body, right? Because we have almost no, in our culture, we have almost no relationship with the subtle body at all because we're so yang in our culture. We have very, very little rest, restorative, oh, I'm not doing anything and I'm being nothing right now and there's almost no space for the subtle body to exist. And so I think that's part of the reason why we attach so strongly to that egocentrism and what I'm doing and how I'm affecting reality or how I'm responding to reality. You know, building that space for the subtle body to have the stage for a little while. I mean, that in itself is a huge work, just to be still enough.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the key to, or one of the keys to become familiar with that subtle body space, stillness, shunya, and breath. Breath will take you there, you know, and breath will accomplish a lot. It tunes you into, you know, now we're not building a house with hammer, nails, boards, and saws. We're going to construct it etherically first. And that there was that neat quote uh, from Abraham last week, I don't know, sometime where they're going, you don't have to work. You don't, you know, pain, effort, work is not required for your happiness or even to produce anything with the law of attraction. You just hold steady with a mental projection um, uh, endorsed and empowered by your heart, and then the cosmos, the universe, in engages in bringing it to you. You know, it's like so subtle body is really cool in that. Yeah, we can tune into that etheric space. We can tune into the subtlety of life and and work on things in that dimension. Um, and that's the first place that creativity initiates. Is the first place that we can solve and resolve our circumstances. Do it in meditation. Otherwise, you're talking about uh, progressive, uh, lower frequency um, experiences. That okay, if I can't do it in my meditation, I'm going to end up doing it in the physical, visible life.
Mm,
And so,
mm,
yeah, and nothing wrong with either of those approaches. I mean, it's like nothing wrong with anything.
right,
It's just like, hey,
right.
just do what's in front of you.
So if I were going to draw somebody a map or try to describe how to find the subtle body, because up until now, the pranic body is sort of I would say like the intermediary, because like prana is like my lungs, my cells, like it can still kind of have some place where that might go. And everything that we've been building up to has some kind of map or location, general sense of like where this is in the physical anatomy or in the yogic anatomy. So like where is the subtle body?
You would have to say the subtle body is where the soul is.
So is that like so when I go into Shunya, I think of it like in Star Trek on the holodeck, right? When they go in the holodeck and there's nothing preset there and it's just the grid, you know?
Hmm.
And it looks like it goes on forever, but it's just a room. But because it's a grid, you just see it looks infinitely expansive. So that's sort of my like visualization tool when I'm starting to merge into the Shunya field. So like, is that the subtle body? Is that the space, or is that like
Um,
these are these are
the
all
words,
cognitive
the
games?
words. Okay, so in this mudra, base of the palms touching, finger thumb tips touching, and space between the palms, you have protective mind, you have projective mind. You have that the hands represent the mind, and the one hand is in charge of protecting, asserting individuality, and um, just rejection. The other hand is about attraction. It's about getting needs fulfilled. It's what we would think of as the projective mind, and the other hand, the protective mind. So you have
Mm,
those in matching, hopefully, and and cooperating. They're they're together. They're close.
mm,
The
mm.
space in between is the soul, right? So can you see it? No, but you know it's there because you've got two things that you can tune into. Can you see them? No, but they're there, just by this symbol
Right.
of this mudra.
Okay.
And so implied in this mudra is this space of the soul, which is real. It's there, but you don't see it. The subtle body is involved in translating the soul to the consciousness, which is around the mudra. Your
Mm,
psyche as identity and consciousness is is pervading through the mudra.
mm,
But in this space with higher density, um, that there's a there's the need for translation of that subtle soul energy through the mind perceptions and the physical body to get to consciousness. And so
mm,
that the the mind is the physical visible, it's material, right? Just subtle. And um, the it contains the it's responsible for all the concepts and all the classification and all the definition of our experience. And so the idea is for the inner space of the soul to translate to consciousness,
Hmm.
to us as awareness, that which sees, that which smells, that which reacts, that which all this is serving. So the idea of life is to connect soul and consciousness, and part of and that process engaged in, okay, what's in what's in between me as consciousness awareness in this realm and soul. And so the subtle body um, is kind of like the envelope, the very subtle envelope of the soul. And so everything moving between consciousness, mind, and visible experience passes through the subtle body to the soul. And that's what, when we leave, that's what feeds Akashic record. That's like the very subtle envelope of this very, very, very subtle soul.
Mm.
That's always in connection with divine. So that's one description or understanding of it, and it's only a suggestion. If it works, fine. If it doesn't work, try something else. I like that. I like the concept of the sheath, and the subtle body is the most subtle aspect of that sheath of mind, projective, protective, unconscious, subconscious, conscious,
Mm.
all the way to, okay, this me, this me in my life is the reflection of my translation of soul to consciousness. That's how I translate who I am, is what you see. No, what what I see. That's how I translate what I see. Yours is how you translate what you see, right? So
Me,
we
me as other, like me as other, just as an everyday person, like I'm interacting with the most,
yourself,
well, when I'm interacting with someone else, like I'm only seeing the most base, visceral, real expression, you know, like I'm not even aware of of your consciousness, you know,
correct.
because I
Yeah.
I'm barely aware of my own consciousness, and that's the other thing that I really like about this is when people first are starting out, the first layer is like, what am I thinking, right? Like where is my consciousness at? And many people who start this work in meditation sort of never breach that realm because they end up getting stuck in the mind and thinking and their awareness. And awareness is the first piece. It's really important, but what's behind the awareness, what's deeper than the awareness. And I think that that's a very subtle and important distinction.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be an interesting investigation.
Well, I'm stoked. I'm very excited. Um, as usual, it's reflective of things that I'm processing, both as my own in my own work and also working with clients and things that I'm picking up on in the greater, because they're not ever really separate. The macrocosm, the microcosm, it's some conversation for another time, maybe. But
Hmm.
oh, actually, let's just say this one thing. So the subtle body that we are interacting with and encapsulated by and through and whatever, because it's not a real, it's not a physical plane, in that sense. Um, but there is also the subtle field, right? Which is the common denominator of all of it. And every one of these concepts, every one of these bodies and layers has that component of there's a personal relationship and experience that I'm having, and there's also the concept of it and everyone else having that experience and sort of where that is. And that's a very interesting, um, maybe something we could talk about another time, a special chat just talking about self versus other and sort of how we're processing these things because right now it just seems like a bomb went off in that part of reality. Where
Yeah,
triage needs
yeah.
to happen in the conversation between self and other.
Well, yeah, well, we touched on it with that. Is like my experience of you is actually me experiencing myself.
Right.
The microcosm translates to the macrocosm translates to microcosm, microcosm translates to macrocosm. It's all we don't know. We don't know what that
Nope.
means. We have no idea what that means as long as we're building stuff with boards, hammers, saws, nails.
Well, I love this and I love that, that we're in a time in our reality, in this time and place where we can have these conversations and people are hungry for this type of conversation because not for purposes of escapism, but for relief in a sense from this hyper
Mhm.
focus on the tangible physical things because there is more to life. There is more to experience, and it's not just rote science, and it's not just identity politics, and it's not just globalization and world wars and green movements and these are all reflections of the conflict that we're growing within at these subtle levels in the microcosm, in the macrocosm. And the more and more we can individually tune into and collectively tune into both as one-on-one conversations like you and I are having, and then for anyone who is watching, it changes your perspective. And when one person's perspective changes, all of our perspectives change. And that is, I think, part of how the subtle field works. Um,
Yes, and again, like you alluded to, this is not about thinking and figuring things out as much as it is how we think and how we relate to everything translates into how we feel, and how we feel is how we affect one another. And so as I refine my perspective, as I refine where I devote my energy, whether it's to manipulating outside or whether it's to the inner uh, demolition and reconstruction, um, will translate into how I feel. And when we do that for ourselves, we also do it for each other. So all those who come to practice, all those who are investigating in this realm, we just make sure that okay, as I become more subtle, as I become more sensitive, it allows more energy to vibrate in that etheric field
mm, mm,
and interact with other people. And people that are coming aren't necessarily looking for how you got there. They just want to feel where you are
mm,
as much, right? And then if they ask a question, how did you do that? Then you go, okay, now we can sit
mm.
down.
I take it back. Everyone should be doing Kali work. I'm going to go ahead and evangelize now. Go down with the black maw and the pit with the bones and the pus and the blood and the
Yeah, she's nitty gritty.
destroy your
But
ego on the banks of the Ganges where they're burning the
yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
That'll really clean out your
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely delightful. I think so far this is my favorite.
Indeed. Yes. Thank
Uh,
you again.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, no, thank you. Again, it will be an exciting September. We have multiple events in town that people can check out on your website, saribahadur.com. There is so tonight, and unfortunately, no one I don't think will see this before the event tonight. But you are possibly starting an evening sound healing series at Homespun in Bastrop, which they're having their grand opening a week from today. And Siri and I should both be there, as well as Sophia, is that her name? The lady that runs Homespun?
Stacy.
Stacy.
Stacy. Hmm.
So it's their grand opening for those of you who are in the Austin area, or if you're located in Bastrop, come out and say hi. It's Friday, the 2nd, starting at 4 p.m. and I think going just until it winds down. She said 10 p.m., but that's a lot of hours. And then the free
Hmm.
day of yoga is actually in downtown Austin at Waterloo Park, and that is you're going on at 6 and we'll be there a little bit early with the table set up and everything to sell CDs and say hi to people. And there's a lot of teachers and studios that are participating in that, so it'll be a really fun day, all day on Labor Day. So you'll be off,
That's great.
come down, hang out, have free yoga. And then for other classes and events, just check the website, saribahadur.com. And don't forget to subscribe because the next 4 months, 3 months that we're doing this is all going to be these deeper and more profound layers. So these conversations, based on today's conversations, I think will get really interesting. So check out the full series to learn about the arc line and how to clear and refine and galvanize your projection to create the reality that you want to see for yourself, for your family, and ultimately for our world. This is the work that we're doing. This is the Garden of Shuniya, and this is why we're here. So, Sari Bahadur, I can't even express my gratitude to you enough. My dear friend, mentor, and teacher. So darling and precious to me. So thank you always for your time and for trusting me with your work and your things. I'm super excited.
Yes. Yes. And thank you. Always. Priceless.
Ah,
And yeah.